you are who Google says you are, or nowadays maybe you are who ChatGPT says you are. Just looking at somebody who is an expert in one area, I think that's harder for you to get on the board. I talked once to a person who was a CFO of a $50 million family-owned healthcare business, privately held company. And he said, numbers are numbers. I could be on the board of a $50 billion publicly traded financial services company because numbers are numbers. It's not going to happen. Never when you network, go in there and say, the first thing you say, my name is Frank and I want to be on a board and can you help me? The majority of people will not help you. Looking for a board opportunity is not just sitting in your room and hoping. It's a job. And sometimes it's a full-time job. I don't think it's a full-time job, but it's a job.
What would be some advice for people who might be seeking out a board for the first time?
In China, they have a 5-year plan. Government has a 5-year plan. And then businesses know what to do the next 5 years. Here in the US, lately, we don't even know what's going to happen in the next 5 weeks. The unpredictability. Tariffs on, tariffs off. And how do you run a company?
Is every CEO a good board director?
That's a good question. I think.
Hi, welcome to the Boardroom Company Live. I'm Naomi Kent, CEO of the Boardroom Company, and I'm here today in Chicago at the Chicago Podcast Studio with Frank Jaehnert. Thank you so much for being here today. Frank is the former CEO of Brady Corp and sits on multiple boards, and he's agreed to share some of his career and insights with us today. So Frank, thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, good. So why don't you start off by kind of telling the audience a little bit about your career and kind of how you got to where you are today?
All right. Great. Yeah, so I grew up in Germany and studied business, graduated from the University of Stuttgart, and then started to work at Robert Bosch. It's a large German company, actually the largest Tier 1 automotive supplier in the world. And I worked there for 13 years, mainly in financial functions, but I also was the integration manager when Bosch Power Tools and Skill Power Tools merged together. I also worked in the corporate controlling and M&A department, and I was assistant to the CEO of Bosch United States, who subsequently became the CEO of Bosch Worldwide. My dream was always to work and live in the United States. And you can imagine, with the CEO of Bosch being my mentor, it was a very hard decision to leave Bosch behind and immigrate to the United States, which I did 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago. And I joined Brady Corporation as a financial analyst. And then I was lucky enough to be promoted several times to CFO and then CEO in the last 10 years. So after 10 years, I retired and joined a couple of boards. So right now I'm on 2 public boards, 1 private board, and on the board of the National Association of Corporate Directors, NACD, Chicago chapter. And in addition to my board work, I prepare people for the exam for National Association of Directors directorship certification. I speak on panels, have spoken on many panels, but this is my first podcast. So I'm actually looking forward to it. Look forward to our discussions. Thanks for having me.
No, you're very welcome. So how did you kind of first get into board service? Did you have a lot of experience as an executive on boards first? Sort of what kind of got you onto the path of board service in the first place?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so of course I served on the board of Brady Corporation. Typically the CEOs of publicly traded companies are part of the board of directors. So I was in all committee meetings, audit committee, Norm Gov committee, compensation committee, for about 8 years till I got a call from a recruiter, executive recruiter, and I said, would you be interested to look at Nordson Corporation as a board member? I knew Nordson Corporation because we would benchmark against them. And it was one of our peer companies, and it was a quick decision for me. I said, absolutely. And of course, as you know, the number one thing what companies, number one experience companies looking for is a sitting CEO for future board member. Sitting CEO, recently retired CEO, sitting CFO, recently retired CFO, and then everybody else.
And so you had both, right? Because you had been the CEO. Yeah. Sorry, you had been CFO, and then you had also been CEO. Was there any conflict of interest there? Because you said you joined a company of like a peer company. Yes. Was there a conflict there or not?
Yeah, they didn't compete with us in the marketplace. They were just a company similar size, similar profitability, industrial manufacturing, global, acquisitive.
Right, got it. And you talked about that you served on committees, so you'd sort of had that experience as well. Was that you were on committees as an executive on the board, or you had sort of sat in on committee meetings? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I was representing the management, right?
Got it.
So typically what you have on a board, you have, let's say, an audit committee, and a board member is the chair of the audit committee, and then a couple of board members are committee members. But nobody from management is actually official part. But of course, as you can imagine, when you have an audit committee, you have the chief financial officer of the company in there, you have maybe the chief accounting officer, maybe the treasurer, and then typically you have the CEO sitting in, just to be able to answer questions which the board might have.
Right. So it was board experience, committee experience, and do you think that they approached you because of your titles? You'd obviously been in leadership roles, but was there anything else that the reason why they chose you to be on boards? Was there something else that sort of drew them to you?
I have met the CEO of Nordson before, but I think the recruiters were just asked to find somebody, and they came up with a couple of names, and the CEO probably knew me and said, well, yeah, I know Frank, he might be a good member, but there were other people as well. I don't think there was anything specific with me, just I was a CEO of a publicly traded company, and that's what they were looking for.
Yeah, I think for a lot of boards when they're hiring, when they think about who they want to bring on, a trust element, right? Like I know him or I've seen him in action. That's critically important. What would be your advice for people who, how do you create that, right? How do you sort of create that? Is it consistency? Is it relationship building? Is it all of the above? What is it?
That's actually a difficult question. Because in my case, I got on my boards through recruiters, and except maybe for Nordson, they really didn't know me.
Okay.
Right. So then you have to get the trust element over in the interview. Right. But on one board, on my private board, I got through a network, and I met with the person who suggested me maybe 3 times. We talked about everything, but not about board service. We talked about working out. We talked about nutrition. And anything else. And one day he said, hey, would you like to join our board? So I'm sure that based on my experience and then based on we clicked personally, that had something to do with it.
Yeah, I don't think when you meet someone, you need to necessarily tell them all about your resume, right? Like sometimes it's about connecting and finding that connection. How important is personal brand when it comes to moving out of an executive role and into board roles and into board careers? Yeah.
So personal brand is an interesting point you make, because in the past, before the internet, long time ago, it was much more difficult to have a personal brand, because people didn't know you. Nowadays, with social media, everybody knows you, right? So the first thing I do when I am presented with a potential board candidate, I look at LinkedIn. Look at their career, what have they done, what is their experience, and I might even put their name into Google or in ChatGPT and ask about this person. And I once was moderating a panel on how to get on a board, and I had a social media expert, and she made a comment. This was a couple of years ago. She said, "You are who Google says you are," or nowadays maybe you are who ChatGPT says you are. So you've got to really be careful what you put out there. So when it comes to LinkedIn, which I think is the number one thing you want to be on if you're looking for a board opportunity, is to just keep it to business. Don't put anything politically in there. That's I think LinkedIn is not the place to do this. And just be careful what you put out there, because it's now available forever for anybody to see.
Yeah, so when you're looking at a candidate or just looking at someone, when you go through their LinkedIn profile, you obviously look at their history and all the information. Do you look at what they're posting? Do you look at what they're commenting on as well?
I do. I mean, the first thing what I look at is the chronology of what have they done, right? What did they study? Then how did they come up through the ranks, their career? But then I certainly look at postings as well, right? What are they posting about? Are they active? Are they speaking? Are they on panels, and what are they posting? And that's why I'm saying be careful what you post.
Yeah, and you can even look back through history, right? You can see everything they've ever posted.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely it's the most public place, right, that people have their information. So,
and this has changed, right, over the last decade. Before this was not the case. Before it was much more difficult for people to get to know you. But now people can read about you.
So this is sort of the process that you do when you're thinking about bringing on new board members. What else do you look for in new board directors that join your boards? What are you looking out for?
I get this question all the time because I'm pretty active on the National Association of Corporate Directors, NACD. So, and I've moderated several panels or spoken on panels on how to get on a board or how to position yourself. So what I'm looking for is for somebody, and I've been in the NomGov committee and chaired the NomGov committee, which basically, is involved in, selecting board members. So here's what I'm looking for. That's me, but I don't think I'm alone in this. I look for somebody with a broad experience, somebody who is not a one-trick pony. There are people who think they are an ESG expert or they are a cyber expert or an artificial intelligence expert, and that's how they get on the board. That's a ticket. What I'm looking for, and I think what many companies are looking for, is somebody with a broad experience. Somebody can contribute to almost any topic in the boardroom, whether it's strategy, mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, insourcing, outsourcing, executive compensation, implementation of ERP system, talent, succession planning, and so forth. And then maybe who happens to be an expert in artificial intelligence or in cyber. But just looking at somebody who is an expert in one area, I think that's harder for you to get on a board because you don't want to have a situation that you're sitting in a boardroom and the only time he or she speaks up and we talk about cyber or when we talk about an HR issue. You want them to be participating in all of it, almost anything. Don't have to be an expert in everything, but you have to have a certain basic understanding. And I think that's why why many companies look for CEOs or CFOs, because they have exposure to a lot of things.
But is every CEO a good board director?
That's a good question. I think there are two components. One is experience and skills. The other one is personality, right? So when you're in the boardroom, I think there's certain maybe how should I say, emotional things which are important. Like you don't want to be the smartest person in the room, the one who dominates a discussion, nor do you want to be the one who never speaks up, right? And is quiet and has to be asked every time. There's also a question of how you deal with management, what kind of questions you ask, how you ask the questions. So a lot of it is EQ, emotional intelligence.
And then what would be some advice for people who might be seeking out a board for the first time?
Yeah.
Like what would you say? I mean, you've obviously got to have these attributes. You've got to have the experience. You've got to be able to demonstrate that. But what is some of your personal advice for people who might be on the lookout?
Yeah, and that's another question I get all the time,
yes,
right?
Sure.
Yeah. Besides, well, let me back up. I think the first question I typically ask is, why do you want to be in a board, right? And you better have an answer for it, because you might get the question from a recruiter or from somebody in the network, or latest when you interview for a board opportunity with the company. And it's not about the money. Even so, I think there are people who it is because of the money. No, it's because you can add value and you have a certain expertise you can help them with. And at the same time, you can take something back to your own company or just to continue to grow. So that's the first thing. Why do you want to be in a board? The second one is what kind of board? Do you want to be on a not-for-profit or do you want to be in a for-profit? If the answer is for-profit, public, private equity, family business, and then is it a board, a company which is in a turnaround situation, which may or may not make it, or a company with steady she goes? Is it a company which is growing leaps and bounds? Is it a startup? Is it, what industry is it in? Is it healthcare? Is it financial services, manufacturing? Size, what kind of size of the company? Is it a $50 million company, a $50 billion company? And maybe I illustrate it with an example. I talked once to a person who was a CFO of a $50 million family-owned healthcare business, privately held company. And he said, numbers are numbers. I could be on the board of a $50 billion publicly traded financial services company because numbers are numbers. Well, it's not going to happen, right? So you got to, when you position yourself, you have to be able to substantiate it. So if you want to be in a public board, if that's what you're interested in, it's helpful if you had public company experience, worked in a publicly traded company. And sometimes when you want to be in a family or ESOP business, maybe it's good if you have some ESOP experience, right? So, excuse me, and the same goes, when you position yourself, as I said earlier, position yourself as broad as you can, but you have to be able to substantiate it. So if you say I have M&A experience and somebody asks you how many acquisitions have you been part of and you have never done one or just one, maybe that's not a good thing, right? So position yourself as broad as possible, but be able to substantiate it with examples. What have you done in this area?
Yeah, and I think to your point, if you're going after a publicly traded company, similar to you, it's more likely to come through a recruiter, right? They're covering a lot of these larger publicly traded companies. And if you're going for a privately held business, it's probably a network, which is how you got on your private company board. So I think, and I do a lot of work around what is the right board for somebody, and not in the long term necessarily. You can have a short term and a midterm and a long term plan, right? And you can say, well, my first board will be a privately held company, and I'll build my experience there. And to your point, if you have family-owned business experience, that lends well. But absolutely, your whole direction will change. Your LinkedIn will look different, right? Your conversation will be different. So I think the type of board that you go for actually designs the whole path, right, that you're going to be on.
And that's a great point, Naomi. I tell a lot of people, maybe your first board is a non-profit, not-for-profit board. And, they are large for-profit, not-for-profit companies. They have committees. They have a compensation committee. They have a corporate governance committee, audit committee. And they're run like a for-profit organization. So you get the first exposure. And maybe the next one is a smaller private company. And then ultimately you might end up at a public company. But if you have no public company experience to think, and maybe you were in human resources or you were a lawyer, to think that it will be easy to get on a publicly traded company board, that's probably a little bit naive. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just harder.
Well, what I do as well is when I speak to people about it, I say you're going to save yourself a lot of time, energy, and resource chasing after the wrong thing, right? And so by actually chasing after the right thing, you'll hopefully get there faster, right? And you'll actually achieve your goal. I've known people who've been seeking out a publicly traded company for 5-6 years, and they're wondering why. And it's because they just don't have the background. Yes. And so you can knock on a lot of doors, and unfortunately, I think people will be very polite and go, "Oh yeah, you could be on a board," and so people sort of go down a wiggly path, but never get there. And so to your point, it's really leverage your strengths, right? Attributes, everything else, but go after what's achievable, I think, in the short term.
Yeah, be realistic, right? And there's nothing wrong with starting with a not-for-profit.
Or an advisory board, corporate advisory board, they're great.
That's another good point.
Yep.
That's something I should have mentioned before. That's the other thing, besides what industry, what size, public, private, and so forth. Do you want to be in a fiduciary board or an advisory board? And maybe the first one is an advisory board. Actually, it's interesting. Just last week, one of our boards, the private company, switched from an advisory board, which I was on for 6 years, to fiduciary board. Because many, owners, family businesses, they don't have a board, and they just start out as they have an advisory board. First, they need to be convinced that it would be helpful. And then they see value in it. At some point of time, as they get older, they might switch to a fiduciary board. Because, at some point of time, there might be a succession issue. Maybe there are no heirs. And then what happens? What happens to the company? Maybe I need a fiduciary board.
Right. No, I think also what I've found is when people join, let's say you're not on any boards, you join a strategic advisory board of a corporation, right? A sort of decent size, not just a startup, right? Not only does it help with your confidence, because now you can start to talk about your experience, but it actually gets you in the room with people, because they go, "Oh, you're on a board. Oh yeah, you should join us for dinner, or you should come to this event, or you should be part of this group or that group, or, oh, I'll introduce you to someone. And so I think it may seem like a small step, but it actually, I think, opens the door. And then if you're smart about it, you can meet all the other advisory board members, right? And leverage those relationships. Same for nonprofit. Often when I work with my clients, I say, have you had a one-to-one with everyone on your nonprofit board? And people have been on these nonprofit boards for years. They've never had a one-to-one with anyone. And then they suddenly have just a friendly, just a chat, just a getting to know them. And then they uncover that, oh, somebody sits on a public company board and someone else sits on another private company board. And suddenly these doors start to open, right? And now they know that you want to be on a corporate board and opportunities just come about. And so I think there's, and somebody said to me once, they said, oh, nonprofits can be a waste of time. I said, that's on you, not on the nonprofit. If you allow it to be a waste of time, it will be, right? Anything can be. So really taking advantage of those networking opportunities, right?
That's well said. And actually, that's how I got in my private board. So there was a executive recruiter, and they had a small get-together with about, I think, 5 or 6 people, board members. And I followed up with every single one of them, had lunch with every single one of them. And one was the one who ultimately asked me if I want to join the board. He's on the advisory board, right? But it was just, first was a lunch, and then we ran into each other at the Chicago Club 2 or 3 times, sometimes by coincidence. We just started establish a relationship. I didn't even tell him I want to be in a board. But he just felt, he might be a good candidate. The chemistry is right, his experience is right, and so forth. I think it's a very, very important point. Also, when you network with people, there are people who will help you. And I would say the majority of people will not help you, but there are a couple of people who will help you. And the ones who will help you, who are going to reciprocate, these are the ones you're going to work with. And of course, you got to do the same. You have to make sure that you help other people as well. So if I were to meet you in a networking environment, let's say at National Association of Corporate Directors, I would meet you. I would say, hi, what's your name? Naomi. All right, what brings you here? What are you up to? What do you do? And you might tell me about that about your business. And you might say, I'm also looking for board opportunity. And I would say, what kind of board? And so forth, ask you questions. And then maybe at the end, I would say, you know what? It's so interesting. I'm looking for board opportunity as well. And maybe we can support each other and maybe, exchange notes. Never, when you network, go in there and say, the first thing you say, my name is Frank and I want to be on a board and can you help me, right? It's not about me. It's about how can I help you? And if you genuinely try to help other people, make introductions, some of those people will reciprocate. It might lead to board opportunity.
Yeah, I think it kind of comes across a little desperate too,
I know.
Right? It's sort of like if you sort of walked up to someone, let's put it in just a regular day-to-day activity, and you said, hey, I'm looking for a job. Can you get me a job?
Yeah.
That's sort of the last person you want to help, right? Or you feel like helping. But no, it sounds like there's a couple of things about networking here to pick up on. One is that one-to-one time, right? Don't just going to these events and meetings, and I know we've got one tomorrow night, and you walk into a room of 80 people. Is this your board opportunity right here? I mean, it's got to be that one-to-one time, really getting to know people. Is that what you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, you establish a relationship with somebody at a network. You meet them the first time, and if you feel there is some mutual interest, you say, would you be interested to maybe meet for coffee? Or for lunch someday. I mean, that's how you and I met.
That's true.
Right?
That's true. Yeah.
You were at PRISM, Private Director Association's
that's right.
Organization, and they have their annual summit. You were looking for somebody to speak in your panel. You saw that I was there as well.
You couldn't make it.
I couldn't make it. I had to cancel. But then you said, "Hey, I'm doing a podcast. Would you be interested in doing a podcast?" Mm-hmm. You have to be proactive, and looking for a board opportunity is not just sitting in your room and hoping. It's a job. And sometimes it's a full-time job. I don't think it's a full-time job, but it's a job. You got to have a strategy. And the other strategy is not just networking, it's talking to recruiters, establishing relationships with recruiters. So typically what I tell people is, if let's say you are in healthcare and you want to be on a healthcare company board, look at the top recruiters, and you can put in a ChatGPT, show me the top 20 recruiters who specialize in healthcare. And you contact them and say, my name is Naomi or Frank, and I'm in town. You maybe live in Chicago, but you say, I'll be in New York City because that's where the recruiter is, first week of December. And I was wondering if you have a couple of minutes for me to introduce myself. And you do this a couple of times, and hopefully you get some people who are willing to meet you in person or on a Zoom call. And here's your relationship. And then you want to make sure you follow up, because recruiters meet so many people. You want to make sure that you follow up in a, not being annoying, but once in a while you follow up. And also when they ask you what are you looking for, you have to have an elevator speech. In 1 or 2 minutes, get across what you're looking for. And don't be too broad, and don't be too narrow. They need to be able to put you in a box and say, Naomi, she could be on this $100 million family company board in this industry because that's what she has done, and that's what she's going to be good at, and that's where she can add value.
Yeah, and I think you have to treat that network, especially the recruiter network, you have to understand that you're not the only person they've met with that day or that hour, right? They've probably had 3 calls, and so you have to be memorable. Also, to another point, we're not going to name any names, but, there are companies that will tell you, send me X amount of dollars and we'll put you in a database, and companies will just find you, right? And you'll be on their board in a flash. I think what we're getting from you is that it's real work. You need to be deliberate about what you do. You need to have a plan. No one can. This is one of the top jobs, right? No one else can get that for you. Would you agree?
I would agree, and it takes time. Sometimes I'm surprised to hear from a recruiter I haven't heard for 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden they call me up and say, I have this board opportunity which might be of interest. Don't think if you don't hear from them for a couple of years that they don't find you, but just don't rely on them finding you as well. Mm-hmm. So I always tell people, once you have established a relationship with a recruiter, connect on LinkedIn, and then whenever you post something, it pops up and they get reminded that you exist. And I cannot tell you how often I got a call from a recruiter after I posted something. They would have probably never called me, but because, as you said, they meet so many people, and they didn't think of me. But now I just posted something. Oh yeah, Frank. I didn't think of him as a candidate, but he could be a good fit, right? So how do you? People ask me, how do I make sure I stay on the radar screen of a recruiter without being annoying? So you meet for the first time, maybe for 10 minutes. You don't want to follow up in 3 months and say, I'm still here. I was wondering if you can meet, right? So what I think works is whenever there's a change in your resume, in your bio, let's say a new address, a new phone number, you joined a new not-for-profit company, send them an updated resume. By doing this, you have just reminded them that you are still there without being annoying. Whenever you speak on a panel, send out a post on LinkedIn before you do the panel, recognize your co-panelists, and maybe a photo from you and maybe from some of the other people to make sure that the recruiter will see it. And then have somebody take a photo, an action photo, when you do something like this, and post it again afterwards and say, here are the key takeaways. So what have you done? You have done 2 opportunities. You have taken 2 opportunities to remind a recruiter that you still exist, right? Without being annoying.
Right. And I think also, and we're sort of mid-October right now, we're coming up to the holidays. I think the holidays are another great time to reconnect with people and just send a note, to say, hey, here's an update from me from the year and things like that. So
I'm going to add this to my playbook.
You've got time. You've got right amount of time. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about some of when you're on a board. First of all, let's talk about some of the challenges that board members face. Talk us through some of the things that perhaps you may not be aware of if you've never served on a board.
Yeah, so you have been invited to serve on a board because you have certain experience, background, and you feel a need. They need maybe somebody who is was a former CFO because they need somebody in the audit committee. And they need somebody from the industry. Now you have made it, and so you have made the board because of your experience, of your career, and so forth. So that's one part. Where I've seen people fail is more on the not so easy to touch base, emotional. For instance, I said earlier, there are people who think they're the smartest person in the room. Maybe they've been a very successful CFO or CEO, and now they're on the board and they think I'm smarter than anybody else. That's not a good thing. On the other hand, people don't speak up. That's not a good thing either. I've seen board members fail because they were not prepared. They didn't read the materials. They didn't try to get up to speed. Some of them would not participate in the discussion. They would dual tasks. Maybe they texted, or they were just very critical. That's another thing. If you ask questions during a board meeting, there's a way to ask questions, which might be different from the way you ask questions when you're a CEO or CFO.
Yeah, and I think asking questions is a very difficult topic to talk about, right? Like it's almost you have to be in the room to know what to ask. But what would be your advice to someone who's thinking, what questions should I be asking, and how should they think through those questions?
So maybe the best way to do is to give you an example. Let's see. Okay, let's say we talk about strategy. Management just presented their strategy to the board and asked for feedback. What do you think? What not to do is say, this is never going to work. We've tried this before. I've seen this other, never going to work. Or even worse, this is the most stupid thing I've ever heard, right? Something like this you certainly don't want to do as a board member. What you want to do, you want to ask questions like, okay, you came up with a strategy. How did you come up with the strategy? What other options have you looked at? And why did you land on this strategy? What are some of the must-believes? Do we have the talent to execute the strategy? Do we have the capital? Do we have the technology? What is competition doing? These are the kind of questions you can ask by trying to find out if management did their homework, and maybe even get management to think about something they haven't thought about it before, right? And you do it in a constructive way. Have you thought about this? And what about this? And how big is the market? And how big would we be? Would we be a Me Too? Is there an 800-pound gorilla? Can we compete against them? And so forth. So you ask questions in a constructive way, and you don't do anything aggressive. Because if you do something aggressive, management is going to pull back and going to become defensive. And your job as a board member is to support management as much as you can, but also being inquisitive, being challenging. Because in the end, you are fiduciary, and you have, and I'm talking about public companies, and you ultimately, are responsible to the shareholders because they elect you.
Yeah, there's definitely an art to asking good questions. I think, and going back to our point of nonprofits and advisory boards, you can learn a lot actually from questions that you hear other people asking. But one word that you used in all your questions was we, right? Like, what are we going, what do we think we should do versus you, right? Like less of the attack, as you said, and more of the supportive kind of language, right?
Yeah, the way I look at it, when I was CEO, I looked at my board as my advisors. And I looked at my management team as my advisors and at my board. I can tell you when I was CEO, it's very interesting, and maybe it's a little bit beyond what we talked about, but maybe it also is helpful for people to understand how things work. When I became CEO, my management team, they would wait what my opinion is, right? Let's say we want to buy a company. They were looking, does Frank want to buy this company or not? And if I wanted to buy this company, we're all for it, right? They all were supportive. I picked this up pretty quickly. Then I didn't say anything. Then they tried to anticipate, would Frank be before it or against it? It took me about 2 years to get my team to a point where they would actually, say what they really think without fear of repercussions, right? And I think the same is true in the boardroom. So as a board chair, for instance, I think you should never tell your board colleagues or the management what you think. I think you should let everybody weigh in, management and all the board members, before you in the end say something. Because I have seen situations where, I can stay with acquisitions, where management presents an acquisition, and one of the board members, maybe one of the more respected board members, jumps out of his seat and says, "This is great. I love it. It's right on the middle of the road. We are going to be so successful." When you do this as a board member, you kind of already precondition the other board members to kind of be supportive. So you don't want to do anything like this, right? You want to ask questions, and you don't want to show your cards right away, because and as a chair of the board, I think you want to make sure that you, if you have a feeling that people might stand on this acquisition, maybe you have somebody who's for it, maybe somebody is against it, and kind of balance it instead of having the first 4 people all for it, and then the rest of the board thinks they need to fall in line. So that's a little bit about the behavior in the boardroom.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And the role of the chair is an interesting one. I've done I talk a lot about that, and not everyone becomes a chair, right? It's not like a promotion, right? Well, you've been a board member for 6 years, so you can now be a chair. It's a very unique skill set that's required to be a chair. What would some of those skills be, do you think, as a chair?
Yeah, so I think I already said one, you don't want to speak first. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure that everybody had a say-so, and if it's a major decision, I think a good chair would make sure that every board member is being heard. And some board members will volunteer, and some board members are maybe more quiet. Then I think a good chair is going to ask everybody in the boardroom, so Mary, what do you think? Bill, what do you think, right? So that everybody had an opportunity to contribute, right? Because otherwise, the people who speak up are the ones who are going to basically influence the decision. So I think that's one of the things what I think works well. And I was fortunate that all the chairs I've worked with were pretty skilled in that way. But I think the biggest mistake you can make as a chair is show your hands where you stand right from the beginning, because you might be wrong. And once you have heard all the board members and management, maybe you change your views. But if you come out right away and then all of a sudden you see it goes a different direction, it's kind of a little bit embarrassing, because then you have to change your views, right? The other thing I think which is important for every board member and also for the chair is if you have a controversial issue and you come to a decision and you come to a conclusion and you say, okay, we're all going to buy this company. And then 2 or 3 years later, it's a big failure. You don't want to be the one who said, well, I actually was never really in favor of this. And, I told you so. No, we were all in favor of it. And now you're going to stand with it and we're going to deal with it together. But no, I told you so and I was never for it. So that's another no-no as a board member, because you decided together. Now we have to live through it together.
At the moment, what are you seeing on the agenda of boards, or what are boards worrying about today that's new, or are they looking into next year and worrying about something? What's a risk that is on their minds at the moment?
It's a great question. I was just on a panel at NACD last week at the summit in National Harbor, Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C., and the same question came up. There has been a shift in the last, I would say, 1 or 2 years. A lot was about DEI and ESG. Now a lot of companies have made progress on DEI and ESG, and this has slipped down on the agenda. Not that it went away, but it's not anymore on top. Same with cyber. Cyber was the big issue. Again, it's still an issue because there are a lot of cyber attacks. Actually, it's increasing. It gets more and more sophisticated. It's still on the agenda, but there are new items on the agenda. For instance, artificial intelligence. What are you doing as a company? What are we doing as a company to take advantage of artificial intelligence? What are the risks and how are we dealing with the risk? Reputational risk of proprietary information or personal information leaking out into the public. How are we dealing with this? So artificial intelligence is one. Economic uncertainty, including the risk of a potential recession, inflation, tariffs, supply chain issues, rare earth materials. Well, if you need rare earth materials, maybe it has just become a little more difficult. So these are a lot of the issues which have become on top of what we have already discussed, but they are more prominent. Artificial intelligence for certain. And the next thing, which I think is going to happen over time, is quantum computing. Was listening to a panel on quantum computing, while the benefits, the opportunities in quantum computing are maybe further out, the risks are further in. So you might have heard steal now and decrypt later. So basically, what you have, there are threat actors who steal your data now, which are encrypted. And later, when quantum computing is a little bit more advanced, they can easily decrypt it. What takes forever now to decrypt with quantum computing might be done in a very short period of time. So steal now, decrypt later. But what you can do now, you can encrypt your data now in a way that quantum computing cannot decrypt it. It's called, what is it called? Post-quantum cryptography. PQC, post-quantum cryptography. And you can do this now. So it's basically protecting against the risk that your proprietary data or personal data can be stolen now and decrypted later. So that's the next thing. But that's very,
yeah,
very
in the
early.
future. But yeah, but it's now. I think what I'm hearing is that boards is sort of adding to the agenda. It's a priority for a period of time until it's kind of under control, or they feel like they have it, and then it perhaps is still on the agenda, but it's not the number one risk and priority. Perhaps, is that fair?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. And management has to deal with this even more so than the board. The board comes in a couple of times a year and lends advice. But I know that managements, they might have 1 or 2 meetings on tariffs every week, right? And in addition to what they had to do in the past. So it never goes away. And, a lot of talk is about deregulation and things might fall away. But my experience has been no matter how much you deregulate, there's always something new that's going to be added. And in the end, it's not less what you have to deal with, it's more, right? Like SEC is thinking about new things they might be able to add. Even so we have deregulation, there are other things which they're going to add. And the more data you have available, the more people can ask.
Having been a CEO, right, I'm sure that you have a lot of empathy for the role of the CEO, but do you think, is the role of the CEO getting harder right now? Like, is it getting more difficult?
I would say so. I would say it has become harder. I think what happened is the unpredictability. Tariffs on, tariffs off, right? And how do you run a company? I heard somebody at a NACD Chicago panel talk about this. He said, I just came back from China. No, that's not me. I'm just talking somebody what he said. He said, in China, they have a 5-year plan. Government has a 5-year plan. And then businesses know what to do the next 5 years. Here in the US, lately, we don't even know what's going to happen in the next 5 weeks. How do you run a company? Like, what do you do with tariffs? Let me illustrate this maybe. If you think the tariffs are here to stick, or the tariffs are not going to stick, might influence your decision, right? So if you think the tariffs are short-lived, maybe you can absorb the additional cost from the tariffs and not pass it on to your customers. If you think it's going to take longer, in addition to absorbing some of the cost and try to offset it, you might have to push a portion onto your customers with the risk of losing share. You might also have to go back to your suppliers and ask them to help. And, and they might or might not, depending on how much power you have and how big the suppliers, you might not have any leverage. If you are a small company and have a big supplier, you might not have any leverage. And then this is short term. The long term, do we move manufacturing into the US or outside the US? I know the idea is to bring manufacturing back to the United States. But what I've seen, it goes both ways. There are American companies who manufacture in the US. It's a main manufacturing hub. And now they have to pay tariffs getting into Europe or Asia. And they say, well, maybe you should have a hub in Europe and manufacture in Europe for the European market. So the strategy I've seen from many companies I talked to at NACD is manufacture in the country where you're selling or in the region where you're selling to avoid tariffs. But again, this is not something which happens overnight. That takes a while to position yourself. For foreign companies, I think it's the opposite. They might have a manufacturing base in Asia, their main manufacturing base, and now with the tariffs, they might consider bringing manufacturing into the US and start operations here. But again, that's not happening from the day to tomorrow, and it all depends on your view. If you think tariffs are going to be here to stay for the long term or going to be short term. That's just one example of the discussions management has with the board.
No, that's very helpful. During this interview, we've talked about all the reasons why board members are great. We talked about asking great questions, being collaborative, their attributes, right, and sort of what they bring to the board. Let's talk a little bit about board evaluations, which is essentially an evaluation of how well a board member is performing. Some boards do it pretty regularly and rigorously. Others don't do it. What are your thoughts around board evaluations and how does that make a board better or worse?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of board evaluations. You know, the board evaluates management all the time. And we expect management to surround themselves with the best people. And when it comes to the board, I think we should use the same principle. You have to get the best people on the board you can in order to create shareholder value and to have a great company. Now, board evaluations, in my opinion, has two purposes. One is to figure out how we can become better as a board. That's one thing. And then the other one is to evaluate individual board members. So let's talk about the first one first, evaluation of the board. So you should ask yourself, either in a survey or in an interview, what can we do better as a board? And I give you an example. When I was chair of a nominating corporate governance committee, we used to have surveys. We would send out a survey and, what can we do better in the board? What we should do more of, less of? How should we, what can we do better in the audit committee? And what should we do more of in the compensation committee? What should we drop and so forth? After a while, and we had a rating, how well are we doing from 1 to 5? After a while, we didn't get many comments. We only got rating, right? So we were not happy with this. Then we changed and we went to surveys. So I, together with the general counsel of the company, would talk to every single board member and ask a question, what can we do better as a board in total? And typical answers, we should spend more time on strategy. We should spend more time on technology or on competition. We should spend less time on, more bureaucratic stuff. Like, there are board members who love to talk about whistleblower activity, ethics policy. It's all important, but it should not dominate the boardroom. You want to make sure you have a whistleblower policy. You want to make sure you have an ethics policy. You make sure it's being monitored and so forth, but don't let it dominate the boardroom. So what can we do better as a board? What can we do better as an audit committee? And then the general counsel would take minutes, privileged and confidential, attorney-client privileged, and would there were takeaways. And the chair of the board and the chair of each committee would then take this as their to-do list for the next year. What can we do better as a board? Should talk more about strategy, right? And then the general counsel would hang up, and I would have a discussion with each board member about their peers. What do you think about Naomi? What do you think about Bill? What do you think about Mary? What do you think about Joe? And that was very interesting. And then as an OMGov chair, I would feed this back to each board member. And they were actually, I was surprised how appreciative they were. They really wanted to know, how can I be a better board member, right? And now this got older after a couple of years, because then they would say, Frank, we had this discussion for the last 3 years. What I told you about Naomi has not changed. There's nothing new I can add. What I told you the last 2 years is still true. So then we added a third party. We asked a third party to come in and have the same discussion. What can we do better as a board? What can we do? What can each board member do better? Because they could not say what I've told you about Naomi. I've told you the last 2 times because I've never talked to this person. So we got some additional information. So I think it's important. But not only is it important to do the evaluation, it's even more important to do something with it, right? Like improve the board. If there is a board member who maybe doesn't speak up a lot, you might want to say, Joe, you don't say a lot, but whenever you say something, everybody listens because you add a lot of value. Everybody's interested. So as an opportunity for you to become a better board member, we would like you to speak up more, right? And that's the kind of thing where I think evaluation is good. And then you might have a situation where you might have to replace a board member if you have given feedback to them maybe once and then twice and nothing changes. Then you might have to act on it. So not only do the evaluation, but act upon it. Do something with it.
And I think it's really helpful for people who are listening who might be on boards that don't do evaluations, right? And it's certainly helpful. And you do them once a year, is that right?
We do it once a year, yeah. And, and the same is true for CEO evaluations. When I was evaluated as CEO, my board came to me once and said, it's a lot of work to talk to all the board members, to talk to your direct reports, and why don't we do it every other year? And I said, no, I want to have it every year because if something goes the wrong direction, I would like to know it sooner rather than later. And 2 years is just too long of a period. 1 year, I think, is too long of a period if things don't go right.
Do you think there should be surprises during those evaluations, or do you think a lot of people kind of knew what was going on, or do you sometimes think surprises come up?
I didn't have any surprises while I did this, right? You kind of knew.
I think so.
Sometimes what you don't get, even in executive session, there's let's talk about a situation. There's one board member who really shouldn't be on the board. Now you have an executive session, all management is gone, and it's just the board. And but this person is sitting in there. Nobody is going to speak up as much and as freely as they would do when they talk with me as a NomGov chair in an individual conversation, right? So I think while you might not have a surprise, a big surprise, you might have maybe a surprise as to how people speak up much more in individual setting and how they might be more outspoken, especially when it's critical.
Right, and it's important to maintain a good relationship as well, right? It's a balance.
Yeah, and I don't think that's any good if there's a board member who is not performing, if people in the executive session gang up on this person. I think that's better done in private and give the board member an opportunity to improve. And if the board member improves, great. We have just, improved the board. If not, well, then, you might have to take another step.
Well, we're going to wrap up in just a sort of minute here. But Frank, is there anything on the horizon, any plans for you personally, professionally, that are coming up that are interesting and you'd like to share?
Which I like to share. Well, right now I'm on 2 public boards, 1 private board, and on 1 nonprofit. I wouldn't mind being on another board, but I'll be very selective, right? Because at this point of time in my life, I want to make sure I can, if somebody approaches me, it's a board I can add value to, right? Because the last thing I want to do is just add another board for just having another board. I want to make sure I can make a difference. And it's a company which would excite me, right? Company which is to go places.
So, when you think about what the best boards that you've been on, do you see a common theme or a common thread across those?
Well, companies I like is company who want to go places. They want to go places, right? Company that are acquisitive because I have a lot of M&A experience. So when I was at Brady as CFO and CEO, we made 50 acquisitions. So I think I have a lot of experience in M&A. So that's an interesting company. International company, certainly manufacturing companies, right? Because it's where I've worked all my life at Bosch and then at Brady. So there's a common theme. I would not want to be on a board of a turnaround company because I've never worked in a turnaround company and I don't have any experience, nor do I want to have any experience in a turnaround, right? Companies may or may not make it. So you need to know, and that's not just talking for me. I think it's for everybody who wants to win a board. Maybe some people are good at turnaround, and that gets them totally excited. Doesn't get me excited, but some other people might. So you got to find what's right for you.
Well, thank you, Frank. Listen, this conversation has been really interesting. I know we've shared all kinds of advice for people aspiring to be on boards, their branding, their LinkedIn profiles, right? We've talked to how to land your first board. We've talked about board evaluations, which I think are really important. Are there any last final words that you'd like to share? Well,
this was a great discussion. I think we touched on a lot of topics, which I think is great. It was my first podcast. So
did great.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Well, thank you all for joining, and thank you to the podcast studio here in Chicago. I'm Naomi Kent. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.